Hello, my name is Paul, and I'm making a video here about design concepts, research, and ideas for people who are trying to figure out what they can do to make things to protect themselves from COVID-19. It's not your typical how-to video. I'm not showing you exactly how to do things, only giving design concepts, ideas, and sharing some of my research for you to prototype your own. I have a background in industrial design, and and my passion or focus was on appropriate technology for the developing world, and its application in the United States. Because anyway, I would encourage you to go to www.practicalaction.org or look up the Schumacher Institute to find out more. It's a very important concept. Anyway, the first thing I would do as an industrial designer is to try to define my design parameters, my considerations. And fortunately, I have an aunt who has a PhD in medical microbiology, and she has worked as a microbiologist for the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Army, and she has developed vaccines for diseases that were acquired in Vietnam and around the world, and developed all kinds of things like that. She's worked in germ warfare, and she looked up some things on Corvid for me. So based on some of the things that we're looking at, that if I were infected and I'm just breathing, I'm giving off the virus as I breathe, not coughing, the virus would travel about 10 feet, and then it would begin to fall to the ground. At 15 feet, it would be on the ground. So people who are like my aunt, working with creatures and people who are directly infected with, will take the rule of 20 feet back. I have no other protection. I'm 20 feet back. Now that's assuming I'm not being coughed on, that there isn't a breeze or anything else. But if you're not a medical worker, you're not a lab worker, you're not directly working with somebody who is infected, your biggest danger isn't acquiring the virus itself directly. It's that the virus can land on dust, and dust can become airborne, and it can travel further. So for DIY, how do I keep myself safe? There's nothing in the village that approaches these masks or these medical supplies. They're not arriving. What do we do? Our danger is of dust. And this is good because the particle size is a big difference. Anthrax is about 5 microns. The coveted N95 mask of 3M I believe is designed up to 3 microns filter up to 3 microns of protection, which is enough to keep the corvid from coming inside and in direct contact, supposedly. And so when I breathe through that, I have a pretty good intuitive understanding of how much filtration 3 microns protection is. Now, again, this isn't scientific, and it isn't the same thing as industry, and it isn't. But that's not the point. I'm trying to find basic things to empower people to be able to make reasonable judgments and prototype for themselves, and to expand and to keep going, and invent things and help people when with whatever we can find from our own empowerment, and to let people know that you can be empowered, you can do things and make things and that can be effective from your own from your own effort in this industry. So the next thing that I do is I wanted to look to see what things have been made in history that have kept people from breathing things that would harm them. Well, the first thing that I could find was that in ancient Rome there was a man named Plethy the Elder who described workers of asbestos. They used it everywhere and they wove clothes out of it. Well, they died very early, and they cut them open, do autopsies. They find their lungs ripped apart. They would find tumors in them. They knew that asbestos, in ancient Rome, they knew asbestos was going to kill you from the dust. So they took a long tube of intestines made out of sheep or intestines, and they actually sewed like a bladder from a sheep. So it would expand like a balloon. And we don't have any pictures, it's just a description. And somehow they would breathe through the tube, and at the other end of the tube was over their back. And there was this bladder to breathe with, and they stuck a cloth at the end of it, and it seemed to work. And asbestos is a very small particle. So, I mean, the fact that a simple cloth over a tube could stop it would mean that the tube and the twists in the tubes was part of the filtering process. So this is an idea too. Now you can see this is an effective material. It keeps 3 microns, but we don't necessarily need to make a flat one. It's an efficient material. It's light and comfortable. It does some great things. But if we can't build a factory for billions of dollars and give 3M billions and billions of dollars and wait till they make a new assembly line and hope that the package arrives to the village, maybe efficiency of material isn't necessarily the best thing to do to save people's lives. You know, just saying. So then I thought, like, the next device that I saw was that in the Middle Ages, during the Black Death, doctors made these big leather masks that had like this big bird-like beak. And what they did was they took bouquets of flowers, and this is from a shaving brush, kind of looks like a bouquet of flowers, and they would put it into these long beaks, and the flowers would go right into the nose. Now, they believed that the Black Death was caused because the planets were not orbiting correctly, and it changed the air on the Earth, and it was bad air. They breathed in the bad air, and that's what caused them to die. That's completely wrong, but what did happen with these bouquets of flowers is the germs would travel up through all of this organic material, and they would land on it. And they basically made a filter. A big, thick, three-dimensional filter. They would remove the flowers, burn them, because no biologic can survive direct flame. Something to bear in mind. But again, a mask does not have to be flat. It can be three-dimensional. So I kind of thought, what if I took a bunch of cheesecloth and I wad it up, and I stick it into a paper cup, and I pop some holes on it, and I have a spot for my nose. I can breathe through that. I can breathe through that fairly well. Actually, I have a little too much material here. But if I'm worried about dust, how long is it going to take before the dust is going to get through all of that into my mouth and nose? It's going to, at some point it would, because this is just cheesecloth. You know, at some point it's going to get through there, but it's going to take quite a while. So, I can change this out. So that's cheesecloth, t-shirts, other materials around, whatever. So that was my simple thing. Now I'm didn't go into the prototype because I'm more than assuming. I've seen some excellent craftsmanship coming out of villages from Africa and Latin America and Asia and the Pacific, with just simple traditional tools. So I have no doubt that people can fabricate, some, very good things with materials and methods that I don't even have a clue about. But here's the basic idea. We don't have to have a mask that's two-dimensional. You can have, the basic concept is there's a lot of surface area for the germ to fall on, either in the Middle Age method or with this variation of it, relative to the volume. The more surface area to volume, the more chances that your germ is going to land on your filter material. That's an important concept. How much surface area can I get for that germ to land on? and still breathe comfortably and it be usable. Now, you can see that this is efficient in material, but this actually, I can just intuitively from breathing, I think would actually have a little bit more protection. Not nearly as comfortable, not nearly as efficient, a little funny looking, but for the purpose of filtering out dust and trying to stay alive, not a bad option. Now, there's some simpler options too. Here's a simple cloth mask that people can sew, and of course we can wad up some material, and guess what? If I compare that just to the N95, not the valve that makes it easier to breathe, just a big old wad of cheesecloth and 2 layers of cotton, it comes really close. But then again, I'm also assuming that my design parameter is not to be working directly with somebody who's infected in direct contact one-on-one like a doctor or nurse. Talk about somebody this is clearly going to keep dust out for a good long time. And we can always replace these kinds of things from things we can find. Now, 3M actually uses that same concept. This is a mask I use to make things out of fiberglass, which have some very toxic dusts in them. And if we pop this guy open, this filter has 2 parts. This is the filter for particle filtration for dust, and this is the chemical part. And so you have to breathe through that too. But you see they double this up. And if I go these two together, this is more filtration than the N95 mask. I think this is pretty close to it. It doesn't have the same kind of one of the seals in it that the N95 has, but they double it up. So again, they're using a third dimension in some of these applications, especially in the ones that are encountering very small and dangerous particles. So that's an important concept too. Now, this was another little variation that I did. Oh wait, before I get to that, there's another material I found I want to talk about. You'll hear a lot of things in survivalists about coffee filters. They're actually overstated. If I had filter paper, lab grade filter paper, of which these are a cheap variation, they would filter out 10 microns, which would take on a lot of bacteria. It can take on a lot of dust particles at 5 microns. It's still too big for a virus. But then again, we've seen concepts of doubling up and making 3 dimensions. And I have a rough idea that this is pretty close to the N95. This is a mask that is specifically for mold spores that are larger than the virus, but they're smaller than most dust particles. Breathing just through the filter. This is a little bit more resistance. So actually at this point, making a little cone to breathe through helps. Now the problem with coffee filters is they're not made the same way as lab grade filter paper. You can hold them up and see discrepancies and things, but it's a material that you can use. You can double it up and add it to a cloth mask. The breathing resistance is very, very close and sometimes surpasses these mask materials. And then it's a question of, can I get the right balance to be able to breathe comfortably so I can function and operate functionally? Because if it's difficult to wear and to function, the mask isn't necessarily has a danger there, because you're going to have to take it off, and you don't want to take it off sooner than later. But there's some other materials that I looked around, and I saw this sponge, and I thought, wow, that sponge has some definite resistance? How much breathing, how long would it take for a dust particle to go from one side of this all the way through if I'm trying to breathe through it? It would seem like it would take quite a bit. So I try to compare it. I cut off a piece of it and I put it under here. Again, I hold it in place. It's there's a lot of filtration with this. It's about twice. It's like it would be like doubling up twice the mold mask, is what it feels like. But there's something else too that I can do with this. In looking at through peer-reviewed papers on how you disinfect for viruses, acids work really well. Vinegar is a pretty good disinfectant. Bases work better. Baking soda, lime, if you use lime for farming or pickling, might be available. They're around a lot. So I can take baking soda and water solution, the sponge, stick it in there, soak it up, squeeze it out. Now I let that dry. I have a disinfectant impregnated into my filter material. So that's another little thing for a DIY thing. If I'm breathing through, it's not necessarily perfect compared to the 3M. It's not as efficient as of a material, but it's available and it's keeping dust out, and I have it in the mask. Worst case scenario, the virus is going through there and it's into the sponge. It's now being in contact with my baking soda or my lime or my basic solution, and that will rip the crap out of it, at least according to some research. Now, some of my friends live in some coastal areas, so I thought there might be a mask and snorkel around. So I thought, again, I put some filter material into the snorkel. This fairly works. What it does is on this mask here that was used for fiberglass by the 3M, if I breathe through just one of these, it's a little bit difficult. So that's why they put a second one on here. The other barrel goes out here, and it becomes very easy to breathe. Now, I did the same kinds of filter material with coffee filters into here, and I made some other, little filters with sponges and some other things, and it basically has the same resistance as a one side of this. So if you have masks and snorkels and other kinds of materials that you can find in your area, you could use those. You could do a mask and snorkel with a filter on it, but you might need two barrels if you did a mask. Try to convert a mask and snorkel. Now, lastly, what do we do when we have a limited supply of masks or materials? Well, a very easy way you can disinfect water at the equator or between the Tropic of Cancers and Capricorn. You could put, if I filled this jar with infected water and I put it in direct sunlight. Now, the minimal exposure is 6 hours at the equator or between the tropics. There would be enough UV light to destroy most viruses. Where I live, it would have to be about double. Now, that's minimum. I would recommend at least a day, and if it were me, 2 days before I drink it. But using that same concept, you could put a mask into a jar, and you could suspend it over the top and put the lid. This is a jar of some cherries from Door County, which has shut down because of Corvid, and I leave a space on the bottom. Now, you could put some like Listerine or vinegar or baking soda or disinfectant or chlorine or Clorox or rubbing alcohol, and as it would gently warm, the vapors will surround that mask. Plus, if it's in direct sunlight, you'll get the UV protection. But I would like to warn you that if you're close to the equator and it's hot, you're in a hot zone, can get very hot in here. If you're going to use these 3M products, I was trying a couple things to disinfect. I find that these fibers, they melt at very, very low temperatures. I was very surprised. Slightly over 100 degrees they'll melt. So if you put them in a jar in a very hot area, be very careful, because this material is good. It's efficient. If you can, but you don't want it to melt. You don't want it to melt solid, because then you can't breathe through it. But some of these other materials, like if you find other kinds of materials where you live that could make good filters, and try taking a couple of coffee filters and breathe through them and say, okay, this is about the same, and you want to disinfect it. You could, they like paper. It's like 400. Was it 451 Fahrenheit 451 or whatever? It's over 400 degrees. It would be surrounded by UV. It would be surrounded by disinfecting fumes, and it's a good way to disinfect that. And so I guess. Oh, and here's some other material that I experimented with: Scotch-Brite pads. I'm kind of curious about two of vacuum cleaner bags. Again, I don't know what kind of materials you can find to act as a filter, but remember, it's we want surface area to amount of volume, and these are some simple ideas that I hope can help people prototype their own masks and their own strategies. And also, because viruses can land on dust, and dust can become airborne, make some efforts to wipe things down, attack dust, stay 20 feet back. And and also, there's been no evidence of them being able to, as yet, induce an infection from skin transmission. That doesn't mean it's not possible. Doesn't mean that as a human I might not, reach down, touch something, put it in my eye, mouth or eye, or that the thing could mutate. That is a possibility too. But the main thing that we're worried about is dust, and the virus landing on a surface, attaching to a dust, and rising again till we breathe it. So, community efforts against dust masks, dust particles. If you're getting closer into direct contact with people, we want them to have the N95s. We do. So please, share, expand, prototype, and keep yourself safe. There's a lot to be said about this. This can all help. And there's a lot of reasons why, if a village is empowered and can make effective tools for their own survival, so that we don't need to keep buying a new solution that needs to keep more and more investment, that's very, very expensive to make more and more products that have to be purchased at higher prices to pay back the tooling. We can have economics as if people matter. Because, we do. Anyway. That means may you drink water from the moon in Javanese Sign Language. Keep the faith, people. And I hope one day to see some wonderful things come